Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Recovery Talk. So, first of all, right now I'm currently doing another intake of clients for one-on-one coaching. So, if you are on the wait list and have been so for a while, do keep an eye on your email inbox and also keep an eye on your junk email because sometimes it gets accidentally flagged as spam and ends up in the spam folder. And also, if you have been on the wait list for quite some time and you have not heard from me and you have checked your inbox, you've checked your spam email and there's nothing, you can also email me just to check that you are on the list, right? Just in case I may have missed you, but I probably haven't. But still, if you're like, hey, I've been on the wait list for a very long time now and haven't heard anything, send me an email to check in and I can confirm that you're on the list. And if you're not, I'll pop you on. So to join the waitlist for my coaching, you essentially just go to my website, letsrecover.co.uk, and just click on the coaching and register on the waitlist. And then I will send you an email when I have spots available. And what I do when I have spots available is, email you. And then I invite you to book a 15-minute free consultation. So this is basically just a no strings attached quick little Zoom meeting or phone call if you prefer that, but then do let me know. So just a quick little catch up to see kind of what you would be looking for in coaching, and also just for me to see if I think you are in the right space for coaching, because it is not for everyone and it's not for everyone all the time, right? Sometimes people may need another level of support. And I am in a space where I do not necessarily take on every person I have a consultation with, only take on if I think that this could be actually a valuable collaboration. Because I genuinely want your success. And if I feel like coaching is not going to be the right action here, or it's not going to be the most responsible action here, then I will not go ahead with that with you. So if you got any more questions about my coaching, you can also, of course, drop me an email at contact@letsrecover.co.uk. But anyways, guys, let's get started with today's topic. So today's topic come from Instagram, where I was basically asking, hey guys, what are some things you would like me to make an episode about? And I got so many wonderful suggestions and listener questions, etc., etc. I got more than I can, of course, cover. But there was one that I got a few times that I thought was very interesting and that I really thought could be productive to cover. And that is the whole thing with a so-called healthy lifestyle after an eating disorder. And I kind of spoke a little bit about that in the last episode where I spoke about so-called healthy eating in recovery. But essentially what people were asking was, okay, when I am recovered, can I then go back into, for instance, like some kind of clean eating lifestyle? Can I ever diet again? So what if I'm recovered and I want to go on a diet? Can I do that? And I thought that could be very, very interesting to cover. Because essentially a lot of people have kind of accepted that, okay, in recovery, I can't eliminate foods. I can't try and control my weight. I need to let that go for recovery. But what about after recovery? Can I then do those things? And I want to start with saying that I am not I'm not here to tell you what to do and what not to do, because you are a free human being. You are allowed to do whatever you want, even if that is something that may not be the best for you, or even if it might be something that can be harmful to you. You actually have the right to do those things. Controversial, but true. And of course, also this is my perspective coming from me as someone who works with people with eating disorders. So I will, of course, have a specific perspective on this, right? That will be shaped from my view of working with this patient group and also working and seeing a lot of people who end up in certain traps after recovery, right? I've seen a lot of people who decide after recovery that, okay, well, now I'm recovered, so now I can, pursue this and that specific lifestyle or way of eating, and then things not going so well. So can you start a diet or a so-called lifestyle change focused on changing what you eat and changing your body after an eating disorder? Here's the thing. If you are fully recovered, then chances are you will not feel the desire to do that. Because what part of you is it that wants to control your food, wants to control your body? Is that the healthy part of you, or is that the eating disorder part of you? So try and let that sink in. Because the goal with recovery would be to come to a point where controlling your body, controlling your food is not going to be a tempting option anymore. I know that can feel hard to believe because Even in recovery, sometimes it can be so tempting to want to like control and restrict. But the goal would be to come to a point where it's not what's tempting you anymore, because your life is about so much more than food and body and exercise. And if you're not at that point, then perhaps you're not fully recovered yet, right? If you still feel like you are obsessing about the thought of eliminating, cutting, changing your body, is that really recovery? Are you really recovered? Essentially, recovery is not just about temporarily changing your behaviors to, fix your metabolism or health or whatsoever, and then boom, you can just jump back into other forms of restrictive behaviors. The goal of recovery is to come to a point where you completely shift your perspective on food, body, and movement. The most firm and steady recoveries I have seen have been recoveries where there has been that shift, where people shift and have more meaning and purpose in their lives rather than what they're going to have for dinner. And this shift does not always happen in recovery. It's so common in recovery to just be very obsessive about, what am I going to have for dinner? But the goal is to come to a point where that is not the highlight of the day. Maybe unless you're going on in a very nice restaurant and you're really looking forward to it. Of course, there will be times where food is exciting. It's okay to be excited about food, right? But you want to come to a point where your life is about more than that. One thing that I hear very often, and I think I discussed this in a previous episode about what I call the fitness trap, is a lot of people say, oh, I'm pursuing recovery so that I can get into fitness and become like a bodybuilder or participate in fitness competitions, not realizing that this urge itself may be the eating disorder. I'm not saying that is absolutely the case for absolutely every single person on this earth, because I cannot make generalized statements because I can't be inside everyone's brain. But I can say that I am often the person who those people will come to afterwards when they realize that this created just one form of obsession with food and body and exercise to another. Basically, they shifted their eating disorder with a more socially acceptable form of restrictive behavior. And then they're like, oh crap, I'm still kind of trapped. I'm still food obsessed. I'm still critical of my body. And this is why I tend to recommend, when I work with people with eating disorders, when I talk to people with eating disorder, is find mission and purpose and interest and fulfillment in other thing than just controlling your food, controlling your body, or controlling your movement. What are your interests? And I know this can be so petrifying, because especially if you had an eating disorder for some time, you might have completely, you might feel like you don't have any interest anymore outside of the eating disorder, because it kind of becomes who you are in a way. It becomes very much like your identity, right? But try and think, what were your interests before your eating disorder? And also, even if you don't know, what about trying new things? It's never too late to start something new. I probably used this example many times, but I literally never cared about plants my entire life until 1 year ago, when I literally just suddenly became really obsessed about plants. Before that, I couldn't keep them alive, didn't really care about them. And then suddenly I got very interested in it. It is never too late to try new things, start new things, see what you like, and also see what you don't. Because a lot of times figuring out what we're passionate about is about also figuring out what we're not passionate about, right? Many things we try and realize that's not for me, but that's a way of eliminating and finding out things that are not for you, and then you can move closer towards what actually is for you. So maybe you try plants and you're just like, wow, this is so boring. Well, then you've tried it. So again, I always say, instead of focusing on finding yourself, focus on creating yourself. But also accept that in recovery, although of course implementing activities that give you purpose and passion outside of recovery is so important, it could be that you will have a bit of a temporary identity crisis, right? And I think this identity crisis is why a lot of people feel so tempted after an eating disorder to jump from one obsession with food, body, and exercise to another. Because essentially you feel empty, feel like you have a bit of a hole inside you, right? And you want to fill it up. So you fill it up with the quickest thing, right? And the quickest thing could be to, out of habit, go for the food, go for the exercise, go for the body, right? How can I change how I eat? How can I be part of some kind of community depending on how I eat, And this is why you see in a lot of communities centered around food, you see a lot of people with current or past eating disorders. Again, this is not to say that every single person in these communities have had an eating disorder, but it is a statistical thing. Very disproportionate amounts of people with eating disorders. I spoke about an example of this in the episode I did about veganism, which again is not meant to debunk or heavily criticize veganism or say that that is always the wrong thing to do, because I think for some people it works, right? And also it's none of my business how other people eat, but it was just offering a perspective. And also I mentioned the episode about fitness, about the fitness trap, and also one I've done on orthorexia as well, right? I've spoken a lot about a lot of these different things in past episodes in more depth, how when we are vulnerable, we feel lost, it can be very tempting to seek out some kind of belonging. And we often seek belonging in things that feel familiar and safe. And controlling food feels very familiar and safe. Or controlling body or controlling exercise. And now to kind of answer something a little bit more in depth about dieting after an eating disorder, because this is also something people ask me on Instagram. Can you diet after an eating disorder? So here's the thing. Again, what I said about, when you are recovered, chances are you will not feel like dieting. Or even if you feel urges to diet, you will know what that can bring. So it won't be tempting. You may be like, dieting seems like a tempting option. Changing my body seems like a tempting option. But I know that didn't work for me. That doesn't work for me. So the way that I see eating disorders, and this is based on research, not just me making up something out of thin air. This is actual research building and backing up on this. The way I see it, people with eating disorders tend to have a different reaction to food restriction than those without eating disorders. Whilst people without eating disorders may respond to food restriction by, they're like, this kind of sucks. I don't want to do this anymore. People with eating disorders often have a bit of a different reaction where they get almost addicted to that restriction and to those behaviors. And it's very interesting because when I see people in recovery, I often see people in recovery who in the beginning of recovery or during their eating disorder, they had the response to restriction of, this is exciting, this is addictive, I want to do this more. But then as they actually go a bit into recovery, they notice that they don't tolerate the restriction the same way anymore. They actually notice that restriction becomes uncomfortable. I've had so many clients who've told me like, I don't think I could restrict anymore because it's like I can't, my body is just like, nope, it's not responding the same way anymore. But anyways, the way I tend to describe it is that with eating disorders, even though eating disorders, I do not believe they are chronic conditions. And unfortunately, I think a lot of treatment practitioners believe eating disorders are chronic conditions, meaning that there is no way to recover. I call bullshit on that. First of all, I myself have personal experience recovering from eating disorder. And of course, it's not just like, if I can do it, everyone can, because I know that's not everyone's experience. Not everyone fully recovers, right? But I do also know that there are a lot of people who have fully recovered from eating disorder, right? So hearing that that's impossible is quite invalidating. But anyways, what I will say is that I do believe that even though eating disorder is not a chronic condition, it gives you a chronic vulnerability. It gives you a chronic vulnerability. That means that when there is a period of food scarcity, of food restriction, whether that is intentional or also unintentional, this can set off certain things in your head and leave you vulnerable. This is why you see a lot of people with eating disorders who actually end up relapsing, not necessarily because they actively chose to go on a diet, but because they fell ill and they had a long period where they were unable to eat a sufficient amount. And then they noticed certain things like a switch in their brain got turned on, and then they found it hard to actually start refueling themselves again. And then, as you can imagine, when someone is then intentionally setting a goal to diet, I don't think I have ever seen this gone well at all, ever, dieting after an eating disorder. I've seen this go wrong time and time and time again, because the thing with an eating disorder is it's kind of like an alcoholic, Can an alcoholic just have a few sips of wine now and then? No, because then they wouldn't be an alcoholic. What makes someone an alcoholic is that inability to control it, and that drinking becomes a risky behavior. And in the same way, if you have or have had an eating disorder, dieting and food restriction and being in energy deficit over time is something that is a risk behavior to you. It's kind of like you are allergic to dieting. I tend to describe people with eating disorders a lot as being allergic to dieting, allergic to being in an energy deficit. And this is why you can see some people without eating disorders, they can go on a diet. I mean, it's not really like a good and sustainable thing to do. We know the science of dieting. It's not something that is scientifically shown to create lasting long-term weight loss. We know that. Most people go on a diet, gain the weight back, and usually with a bit of extra as well. If you're interested in knowing why, I've explained this briefly in the episode about metabolism. But essentially, this has to do with metabolic adaptations and changes in hunger, fullness, and body fat storage hormones that happen with energy restriction. But regardless of this, a person with an eating disorder goes on a diet, even though it's quite an ineffective and not sustainable thing to do. If they go on a diet, they might be able to go on a diet for, let's say, a few weeks, and then afterwards be fine and return to their normal life without this diet completely wreaking havoc on their life. In the same way that because I do not have a problem with alcohol, I'm able to go on a night out and have a drink. I'm not going to feel tempted to just keep drinking. I'm not going to be like, next day I need to drink again. I'm just going to be able to have a drink and then be fine with that because I don't have that vulnerability towards alcoholism. But I also know that if I were to go on a diet, even as a recovered person, I know that certain things would happen in my body because of the way my body responds to being in an energy deficit. And as a result, I just don't diet. I don't restrict my food. I'm making sure to nourish myself. So I would strongly discourage people, any person really, to go on a diet. But if you have or have had an eating disorder, I would especially strongly discourage it because the risk of relapse is just too goddamn high. In the same way that I would not take an alcoholic to a bar and say, oh, one drink is fine, because very often it's not going to be one drink. So when you see other people going on a diet and you kind of feel tempted to engage, right? Because you're like, oh, why are they allowed to do this? Why are they allowed to go on this juice cleanse and I can't do it? Remember that they do not have that same vulnerability as you do. And once again, remember that recovery is not just about, restoring your metabolism, reaching a set point weight, and eating a sufficient amount of food, all of these things. It is also about changing your mindset towards your body, towards food, towards diet culture. In a way, recovery is a bit like taking the diet culture red pill, right? Like suddenly you're like, whoa, diet culture is such a scam and I do not want to engage. Because honestly, it is such a freaking scam. Why would you want to engage? It's ineffective, it's risky. And if you know that it is a very, very risky behavior and you're fully recovered, but you're absolutely so tempted to engage in that, is that really the healthy part of you, or is that your eating disorder wanting you to take that risk and engage in dieting? Because the desire to risk your entire recovery to go on a diet, chances are that is your eating disorder wanting you to take that risk. I want to ask yourself why. Why would you go on a diet after an eating disorder? Why? What are the reasons to do it? You may say, to lose some weight because that will make me feel good about my body. Well, does it really though? Is your body really the problem here, or is it the problem in your head? Is the problem the mindset? Because again, we know the risk of relapse, and we also know that people with eating disorder don't tend to really love their bodies or be super comfortable in their bodies, right? So in a way, it's quite an ineffective solution. If the problem is not your body, the problem is in your head, then actually focusing on your mindset could be way more productive rather than trying to fix your body, because your body is not the problem. And if you are someone who's currently really struggling and just the thought of ever accepting your body at its natural set point range just feels impossible, I want to remind you that it may feel impossible now, but it is still a possibility for the future. Maybe now you're in a phase where you just have to tolerate your body, right? But body tolerance and body neutrality tends to come before full body love and appreciation. I had to go through quite some time in my recovery where I was simply just tolerating my body, or barely even tolerating it, before I started actually liking and appreciating it. But if you're going to diet, you're kind of telling yourself and your body that you are flawed and you need to change before I can, love and accept you, right? And then if you lose weight, chances are it's not really going to help your body image, because your body image is in your head, it's not in your body. And also, a bit ironically, what I often see with people with eating disorders is that as they start losing weight, if they lose weight, they tend to notice that their body image, even though they might get those little kicks that, ooh, this number on the scale went down, still, like with time, their body image tends to worsen and body dysmorphia tend to really, really get bad. And then the same way in the recovery process, they might feel like their body image is quite shit, right? But then with time and acceptance and staying at their set point weight, they tend to notice that they view their body more neutrally and realistically. And this is why I often say that actually weight gain in recovery can with time actually help heal your body image. And this was actually also seen in studies such as Minnesota starvation study, where the men in that study actually, they said that they started feeling fat when they were in recovery, when they started gaining weight. And these people have never had any problems with body image before, but the act of losing weight and then having to put it back on was something that made their body image suffer. But then as they actually were fully restored and healthy again, then those problems disappeared. I feel like I've said like 10 times in this episode. For more about that, listen to a former episode about this and that and this and that. But I did do an episode about the Minnesota starvation study as well, if you want to listen. God, I really have done an episode about almost anything by now. So yeah, I think my advice in the situation would be to not just recover so that you can jump straight into diet culture, but recover so you can change your mindset about food and body and become bulletproof to diet culture and find meaning and identity outside of it. Remember, you are so much more than what you do at the gym or what is on your plate or a number on the scale. And be mindful of communities that reinforce this being your identity. Part of recovery can be realizing that you can never go on a diet ever again, right? And that can be terrifying, but it can also be liberating, because that means that whenever you see diet culture, you can just remind yourself it doesn't apply to me. I hope this was insightful, and now let me answer a listener question. So this week's listener question is about muscle atrophy. I do not know if I'm pronouncing that word correctly, but essentially when someone is quite underweight, undernourished, what tends to happen is that, of course, the weight lost is not always just body fat, it also is muscle, and also weight loss from, internal organs and internal muscle. For instance, the heart is a muscle, right? And we know that actually losing organ sounds so dramatic, but like losing actual organ tissue can happen with eating disorders. So the person was essentially asking, do I need to do anything particular about that? And the answer is, yes, you need to gain weight and you need to fuel yourself enough, not just to cover the essentials, right? Because essentially our body is very smart, right? An underweight body, then the priority from your body is going to be to gain body fat to protect yourself and protect your organs, right? That's kind of what the body tends to do right off the bat. That is very important for the body. But then as you fuel yourself even more food, then also your body is going to have energy to fix, to repair, to heal. An eating disorder can do so much damage. And if the problem is the energy deficit, then you need to correct that energy deficit by actually creating an energy surplus. That way, you give your body enough energy, not just to restore the body fat mass, but also to repair the damage, heal your metabolism, etc., etc. It's pretty scary, but actually in a lot of people, especially with anorexia nervosa, you can actually see a shrinked heart, like the heart actually shrinks in size. That is pretty creepy. But the good news is that a lot of this is fixable, but if you let it go on for a very long time, then you're creating more damage and it becomes more and more dangerous. An eating disorder can kind of just weaken everything. So I mentioned heart, but also things such as weakening digestive system, weakening the bladder, the bladder muscle. Essentially, as this person mentions in this question, we have muscle, not just the typical muscle we think about, such as the visible muscle, or like the muscle in like our arms or legs and these things. We also have muscles inside our body. So essentially, yes, what you need to do is that you need to correct the energy deficit and rest and eat a lot of food over a prolonged period of time. Do you need to do anything specific outside of that to fix those specific things? I mean, no, it's not like you need to do some bladder muscle or heart muscle exercises to specifically fix that muscle. You need to eat because chances are this happened due to an energy deficit, which means that weight restoration, restoring to your set point weight and giving your body enough energy to actually repair the damage is what's going to be the solution in this case. I would say that if you're experiencing, severe like muscle atrophy, again, I probably do not pronounce that word correctly, but if you're experiencing that to a severe extent, and if it's something that's concerning you, maybe you have quite a few symptoms of it, please do talk to a doctor about it. But essentially, when you are gaining weight in recovery, you are not just gaining body fat, even though you are also gaining body fat, which is an absolutely essential thing. Remember, body fat is an essential hormone-producing organ that also keeps you warm, protects your organs, but you are also gaining muscle. Not just the muscle, typical muscle like you think about in your arms and in your legs, you are also gaining the internal muscle. And even bones, you're literally gaining bones. If you have experienced a decreased bone density from your eating disorder, and you have, for instance, osteopenia, then actually recovering helps build up your bones again. So you are gaining so much in recovery, huh? So many different things you're gaining. Weight gain is really a blessing, right? Food, rest, repeat. Our bodies are incredibly good at repairing themselves as long as we give them the tools to actually do so. You can't expect your body to fully heal your metabolism, heal your mindset, and heal, all the damage that you've done eating starvation amount of calories and just thinking and hoping for the best. That's just not how it works, right? Think of it this way. You have a house, right? And you get a certain amount of money. So if you get a very, very low amount of money, then you're probably just going to prioritize the absolutely most important things in that house, right? You're going to prioritize maybe keeping the water running, maybe the electricity, right? But if then you give someone a lot more money, then they're going to have money now to actually repair this house. So let's say this was like a bit of a broken house, right? Bit of a rundown house. Then they can actually go in and fix the walls and help isolate the house, right? Maybe fix up the roofing, all of these things. And that's essentially what you're doing in recovery when you're giving yourself more energy. You're giving your body more currency to fix damage and help and heal you. Remember, there is no such thing as too much food in recovery. Of course, if you're someone who's in early recovery, you are very, very undernourished or underweight, and you are in the risk group of refeeding syndrome, then of course you shouldn't attempt to acutely increase your intake with no medical supervision. You should talk to a doctor just to make sure that you're being supervised and safe, just to avoid that refeeding syndrome risk, right? But except for that, there is no such thing as too much food in recovery. Okay, guys, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. And if you do, feel free to rate it on Spotify or iTunes or wherever you are listening to this podcast. Feel free to share with a friend, spread the word. I'm always very grateful for that. I look forward to talking with you guys next week. Have a lovely, lovely day.